Welcome to the Prophecy Club, where we study and research Bible prophecy. You know, the Bible says in Matthew 24 that in the last days there's going to be all kinds of delusions. One of the delusions, basically a lie that has confused a lot of people, perhaps going to send a lot of them to separation from God for eternity, is the lie of evolution. And our topic tonight is entitled Evolution and the Textbooks. We need to understand what is the truth. And the speaker tonight is, in fact, one of the most qualified in the United States, if not around the world, to speak on evolution in our textbooks. He's had 15 years experience as a science teacher. He has a doctorate degree. For the last 7 years, he's been going all across America, speaking out on the truth of creation and the lie of evolution. He's done over 2,000 radio programs. He's been in 27 debates with university professors and not lost a one. As a matter of fact, he can't find anyone to pick up the next debate. He can't find anyone that wants to debate him anymore. He's booked 2 years in advance. He speaks over 700 times each year. Will you help me welcome Dr. Kent Hovind?
All right. Thank you, brother. Thank you. All right. Boy, it is good to be here this evening. I can't wait to hear me speak after all that. My name is Kent Hovind. As he said, I was a high school science teacher 15 years, and now travel around, speak on creation, evolution, and dinosaurs. I want to tell you right up front, before we get started, I have a deliberate prejudice. I believe the Bible is the infallible, inspired, inerrant Word of the living God. I believe it from cover to cover. I even believe the cover says Kent Hovind. I believe that. All right, now what I try to do in my seminars, 3 things, and my seminar is 11 hours long. We're not going to cover all that tonight. We've got it all on videotape on the back table back there. But I want to strengthen your faith in the Word of God, number 1. If you're not saved, I want to try to get you saved. I'll tell you right up front, I'm after you, okay? I'd like to see you get converted. And number 3, if you are saved and you're not doing much for the Lord, I'm going to try to make you uncomfortable. There's a war going on. You need to find something to do, okay? If you can't shoot, carry bullets, but do something for the Lord with your life. What I cover in my seminar, the part that we are not going to be able to cover tonight, I'll just bring you up to speed. I normally cover in the first videotape about the age of the earth. These 2 charts illustrate the differences between what the Bible teaches and what the evolution view teaches that's in our textbooks. The Bible teaches that God created everything about 6,000 years ago. Now, I don't put an exact date on the creation and say it was 4004 BC, October 23rd at 2 in the afternoon. Okay, I don't think you can get that close. But I think Adam was made in the afternoon, though, because it was just before Eve. That's the only clue I can find. And I think I figured out why God made Adam first. Now, I cannot prove this, but I think God made Adam first because he didn't want any advice on how to do it. Just humble opinion. Anyway. Then the Bible teaches that about 6,000 or 4,400 years ago there was a flood that destroyed the world. Noah built a big ark, saved all the critters on board. Jesus came 2,000 years ago, died on the cross, and then rose from the dead, and he's alive forevermore to save us from our sins. And here we are today, anticipating the soon return of the Lord. What the kids are taught in the textbooks, though, is very different. They're taught the universe began 20 billion years ago with a big bang. Of course, they don't know what exploded or where it came from, but there was a big bang. And then 4.6 billion years ago, the earth cooled down and developed a hard rocky crust. And then it rained on the rocks for millions and millions of years and turned them into soup. And the soup came alive about 3 billion years ago. And this early life form found somebody to marry and something to eat and survived and happened to learn how to reproduce itself and then slowly evolved into all the life forms that we have today. These are basically the 2 different worldviews. Somebody is clearly wrong, and I enjoy showing them who they are. So, if the earth is indeed only 6,000 years old, that raises all sorts of practical questions. Like, hey, what about the dinosaurs? And I can't cover what I cover for 2 hours on my videotape, but I'll just give you a 1 or 2 minute quick synopsis. The Bible would indicate that everything was made in 6 days. That would include the dinosaurs. They were with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They were just big lizards. Lizards never stop growing. They never stop. So, before the flood, when the people used to live to be over 900 years of age, the reptiles grew to be gigantic. And when the critters got buried in the flood, they turned into fossils, and we dig up the dinosaur toe bones. This is a toe bone from this kind of dinosaur. They were gigantic. They find them 150 feet now is the record for length. That's a big lizard. But that wasn't prehistoric millions of years ago. That was just pre-flood. Everything before the flood was probably much larger. And I cover all that on the first videotape. So Noah took dinosaurs on the ark. People say, dinosaurs on the ark? They're kind of big, aren't they? Well, only the big ones were big. The little ones were little. And Noah was 600 when he built that boat. He was probably smart enough to figure out you don't have to bring the biggest ones you can find. You could bring babies, you know, just be sure to get a pink one and a blue one. That's all you'd have to worry about. Noah could figure that out. Then after the flood, two things happened to the dinosaurs, I think. The climate changed. People did not live to be 900 anymore. Lifespans dropped off right away. And we cover on videotape number 1 why their lifespans dropped off and what happened. The same thing happened to the dinosaurs. They couldn't live as long. They couldn't grow as big. So the bigger ones died off because of the climate changes and also because of man's hunting. Back in those days, they called them dragons. The word dinosaur was just invented in 1841, so of course they didn't call them dinosaur. It's a brand new word. They called them dragons, and most of the dinosaurs were killed off by the climate change or by man in the first, say, 1,000 years after the flood. Then as civilizations began to develop around the world, population began to grow, and dinosaurs began to be more rare, and pretty soon they were forgotten about. But they're mentioned all through history as dragons. They're mentioned in the Bible. We cover that on videotape number 2. And there could be a few stragglers still alive today, which we also cover on videotape number 2, about the Loch Ness Monster and the Lake Champlain Monster and Mokele Mbembe in the Congo swamp, and the one that washed up on the beach in California in 1925, a 40-foot-long dead dinosaur, and the one the Japanese fishing boat caught in 1977, and the one the guy caught in Cadborough Bay, British Columbia, a baby one 18 inches long, a baby dinosaur, caught it alive in his net, had it on his fishing boat just 3 years ago. That's all on the table down here in all these charts and stuff like that. So we cover about dinosaurs that may still be alive. But tonight I want to cover what is in the textbooks. What are the kids being taught? And is it correct? And what we can do about it? You know, it's always amazed me, in my 15 years of teaching science, how two people can look at the same thing and come to opposite conclusions of what they're looking at. You know, two people can look at Grand Canyon. They're both looking at the same canyon. But one of them believes in evolution. So he says, wow, look what the Colorado River did for millions and millions of years. The Christian stands there, looks at the same canyon, and says, wow, look what the flood did in about 30 minutes. How was that canyon formed, huh? Was it a little bit of water and a whole lot of time, or a whole lot of water and a little bit of time? Two ways to look at it. Take your choice. If you believe the Bible, it's no problem. Grand Canyon made as the floodwaters ran off, probably in a day or less, a couple hours maybe. Not millions of years, that's for sure. I'll give you another example of two ways to look at things. Is there anybody in the crowd, any farmers or vets in the crowd that know what this contraption is? This guy's holding a come-along attached to a pole for a very particular purpose. Surely there's somebody who knows what this is. That's a calf puller. You're only about the 8th person that's ever known that. A calf puller. A what? Well, once in a while a cow has a hard time having that baby calf. And they get the calf puller out, hook it on the calf's leg while the cow's trying to give birth, you know, and they jack the calf out of the cow. You get 7 tons of pressure on there. It's amazing. That calf come right out, no problem. Well, this farmer was out pulling a calf one day. It was a breech birth. Back feet coming out first. Not good. So the farmer had the calf puller, and he's trying to pull the calf out, and a city slicker stopped his car to see what on earth is going on over the fence. And the farmer said, hey, man, come here, give me some help, would you? He said, me? I don't know nothing about cows. He said, just come give me a hand, would you? He said, okay, okay. So the city fellow hopped out of his car. He hopped the fence and ran over and helped the farmer pull the calf. He never said a word. He just did what he was told. Well, after about 10 minutes, they're walking up to the barn, going to get washed up, you know. The farmer said, hey, I want to thank you for helping me. The city fellow said, oh, glad to help, glad to do it. The farmer said, have you ever seen anything like this before? The city fellow said, no, sir, I ain't never seen nothing like this before in my life. The farmer said, well, you got any questions? He said, yes, sir, I do. I got one question. It's been bugging me for 10 minutes. The farmer said, well, what's your question? He said, sir, how fast do you figure that calf was going when it ran into that cow? No, no, no. You're looking at this all wrong, fella. We're not separating the wreck here. You know, two people can look at the same thing, and one of them gets the wrong idea what's going on. I'll refer back to that a time or two tonight. How fast was that calf going anyway? Just to show you how it is so easy to look at something and be totally wrong in your interpretation. You know, the Bible warned us this would happen. 2 Peter chapter 3. Knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers. Did you know there are people that scoff at the Bible? I deal with them on a regular basis. I attract them like a magnet. Scoffers. It says they're going to walk after their own lusts. And there's the reason they scoff right there, folks, because of their lust, their lifestyle. There's no scientific reason to reject the Bible. But some people reject this book because of their lifestyle. They don't want God telling them what to do. That's the bottom line. That's why for many years I've offered $10,000. On the back of my business card it says, I will pay $10,000 to anybody with any scientific evidence for evolution. I don't make this offer because I'm looking for a fight. I'm not looking for a fight. I'm like the Quaker that said, Sir, I would not harm thee for the world, but thou art standing where I'm about to shoot. I'm just sick and tired of them using my tax dollars to spread their religion in our school system. Amen. And evolution is a religion, it is not a science. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. There's two different kinds of evolution, two different meanings of the word, and one of them is just a pure religion, that's all. Anyway, the scoffers are going to walk after their lusts, and they're going to say, where is the promise of His coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were. Very important phrase. All things continue as they were. In other words, the way it's happening now is the way it's always been happening for millions and billions of years. Long, slow, gradual processes. The scoffers are going to teach that. We were warned it was going to happen. 2,000 years ago we got warned. They're going to say, the next verse says, for this they willingly are ignorant of. Willingly ignorant. In the Greek that means dumb on purpose. Ignorance is bliss. They're having a blizzard, man, leave them alone, okay? The scoffers are willingly ignorant of two things. They're ignorant of how God made the heavens, and the word heaven is plural. There's more than one heaven. We covered that in videotape number 1, what that means. And how the earth was out of the water and in the water. How can the earth be out of the water and in the water at the same time? Well, we covered that on tape number 1 also. You'd have to get that. But the scoffers basically are ignorant of the creation. They're ignorant of how God made the heavens and the earth. It was different then than it is today. The reason they're ignorant of the creation, willingly ignorant, is because they don't want to admit God owns this world. Because you see, if God owns this place, there might be some rules. They don't want that. The second thing they're ignorant of is the flood, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. There was a flood that wrecked the world. They don't want to admit that either, because if God wrecked the world with a flood, that would mean God has the right to wreck the world if He wants. It's His, you know, He can wreck it if He wants. They don't want to admit God has the authority to judge the world. By the way, He's coming to judge it again pretty soon. I saw a bumper sticker that said, Jesus is coming, and boy is He mad. Oh, wow, that'll preach. Well, one of the scoffers in the last days was a guy named James Hutton. James Hutton hated the Bible, which is no big deal. There have always been folks that hate the Bible. James Hutton lived in Scotland. He hated the Bible. He lived back in the late 1700s, though. That's where the problem comes in. You see, back in the late 1700s, most people believed the Bible. They were strongly influenced by Scripture. Now, they were not all Christians, of course, I understand that. But most people believed the Bible, and most people thought the world was about 6,000 years old. That was the accepted worldview of the day. James Hutton comes along and writes a book in 1795 and says, I think the earth is millions of years old. Well, he wasn't the first one to propose the idea, but he was the first one in modern times, and that really kind of got a little bit of a hearing. People started paying attention. Well, maybe it is. Well, James Hutton in the textbooks today is called a Scottish scientist who developed the idea of the principle of uniformitarianism. Big word. What that means is the present is the key to the past. The way it's happening now is the way it's always been happening for millions and billions of years. Just like 2 Peter prophesied was going to happen. James Hutton was a scoffer who said, all things continue as they were. Nobody paid a whole lot of attention to James Hutton, but Charles Lyell sure did. Charles Lyell was a lawyer from Scotland. Somebody recently calculated that if all the lawyers in the world were laid end to end around the equator, we would all be better off. Charles Lyell hated the Bible also. Charles Lyell, in 1830, wrote a book. He wrote the book Principles of Geology. I have the book right here, volume 1. In this book right here, Charles Lyell's hatred for the Bible reeks off every page. I mean, this guy didn't like the Bible. It's real obvious. Just read it and you'll see, wow, what's the matter with this guy? He don't like the Bible, does he? No, he doesn't. Charles Lyell wrote this book in 1830. In this book, building on the work of others, but mostly Lyell's responsible for this. I've read the history about it. I know about Stratus Smith and all these guys. But Lyell's the primary guy responsible for developing what we have today in the textbooks called the geologic column. How many have ever heard of the geologic column before? The geologic column has different layers, you know, the Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic, and Archaeozoic, billions of years ago. You might want to know a few things about this geologic column. That's in nearly all the textbooks. Each of the layers of the Earth was given a different name. Maybe you saw the movie Jurassic Park. That's after the Jurassic layer. Each layer has a name, it has an age, and it has an index fossil. Next thing you need to know about the geologic column, this is the Bible to the evolutionist. If somebody believes in evolution, that's his Bible right there. And the last thing we're going to talk about tonight about the geologic column, there's only one place in the world where you can actually find it. The only place you can actually find the geologic column is in the textbooks. It does not exist. They got it in the textbooks like it's some kind of proven historical fact, and it doesn't exist any place in the world except in the textbooks. HBJ Earth Science says if there were a column of sediments, unfortunately, no such column exists. Doesn't exist, folks. He made up the whole thing. Now, it is true the Earth has different layers, no question. Okay? I've been to Grand Canyon, been to Royal Gorge, been to 49 states and about 8 countries now. No question the Earth has layers. No question it's cracked up. I've been to San Andreas Fault, the New Madrid Fault, the Hayward Fault. None of them are my fault, but I've been there. I've seen them. No question it's moving. But how did it get that way? See, there might be 2 ways to look at that. How fast was that calf going? Anyway. It could be each of those layers is a different age, or it could be all of those layers were put down in one big flood. You can get a jar of dirt, shake it up. It'll settle out into layers for you. Water automatically does that. It's called hydrologic sorting. I think the flood did all those layers during the first 6 or 7 months. And then during the last few months, as the water was running off, whoosh, it cut the canyon out while the rock was still soft mud layers. Now it's hardened into rock, and it looks like it took millions of years to get there. No, it didn't. It took a couple of days. The scoffers are ignorant of the creation and the flood. I was preaching in Union Center, South Dakota years ago, the middle of no place. Not quite the end of the world, but we could see it from there. We were close, I'm telling you what. 40 people in the whole town. 38 of them came to church. I don't know where the other 2 were. Out pulling a calf, I reckon. But anyway, the preacher said, hey, Brother Hovind, let's go down to Rapid City, South Dakota. They got a museum there with a bunch of dinosaur bones in it. I said, all right, let's go. I like dinosaurs. So we all went down to the museum. We walked in the door, and the fellow met us at the door and said, hey, I'm a guide here. Would you like me to give you a tour? We said, that'd be fine. First place we stopped on the tour was the geologic time scale. Big, huge chart, all lit up. Very proud of it. We stopped at the big old chart, and the guide said, now, ladies and gentlemen, this layer of rock right here is about 70 million years old. My daughter was 12 at the time. She raised her hand. She said, excuse me, sir, how do you know how old the rock layer is? He said, that's a good question, honey. We tell the age of the layers by the types of fossils they contain. They're called index fossils. She said, oh, okay. We walked around the other side of the dinosaur. We're standing over here, and the guide said, now, ladies and gentlemen, these bones you're looking at are about 100 million years old. My daughter raised her hand again. She said, excuse me, sir, how do you tell how old the fossils are? He said, oh, that's a good question, honey. We tell the age of the fossils by which layer they're found in. She said, excuse me, sir, but when we were standing over there, you told me you knew the age of the layers by the fossils, and now you're telling me you know the age of the fossils by the layers. She said, isn't that circular reasoning? I thought, wow, chip off the old block. That guide had the strangest look on his face. It was almost as if he were thinking. Not quite, but close. He looked at my daughter. He looked at me. I wasn't about to help him. I thought, wow, this is going to be good. He looked back at my daughter. He said, you know, you are right. I've never thought of that before. That is circular reasoning. That poor fellow drove 50 miles one way that night to hear me preach in Union Center, South Dakota. Afterwards, he talked to me for nearly an hour. He said, Mr. Hovind, is everything I believe about geology wrong? I teach it at the college. I said, oh, no, no, you've learned many good things. I like geology, man. I taught earth science. You learned the names of all the minerals. Just that's a good trick, folks. There's 1,200 different minerals. They got names about that long. You learned how to prospect for ore, Mohs hardness test, the Rockwell test, the scratch test. I said, no, no, I like geology. But as far as learning the different layers and the different ages, I said, yes, sir, that part is all baloney. Now, he doesn't dare quit teaching it, because if he does, he'll lose his job. And you might as well learn this tonight, folks, in case you don't already know. To some people in this world, money is more important than truth. Yes. If they have to lie or cheat or steal to get their money, they will. Yep. And there are many people who continually teach the evolution theory and the geologic column, even though they know it's not true, because they want to get that paycheck coming in. That's their God, George. Washington, you know, never mind. Well, in the textbooks, though, they show the circular reasoning. I saw Glencoe Biology. I collect public school textbooks. I have hundreds of them. Glencoe Biology, 94 edition, says, layers of rock are dated by the types of fossils they contain. Did you catch that? How do they date the rock layers? Fossils. Not by carbon dating, not by potassium argon, uranium lead, lead 206, 208 to 206. None of the dating methods. They date them by the fossils. Very next page says, fossils in these layers increase in age from top to bottom. Now, wait a minute. Here they're dating the layers by the fossils, and now they're dating the fossils by the layers. They increase in age from top to bottom. The deeper you go, the older they get. Circular reasoning. Absolutely. They talk about these index fossils. Textbook says trilobites, like this trilobite here, make good index fossils. If a trilobite is found in a rock layer, the rock layer was probably formed 500 million years ago. You think so, huh? Would you explain this to me, please? Here's a fossil of a human shoe print. Somebody with a shoe on, I mean heel and everything. Right, here's the heel mark. This guy with a shoe on stepped on and squashed a trilobite. There it is, a blow-up of it. They asked geologists all over, they said, how could a human with a shoe on step on a trilobite? If trilobites lived 500 million years ago, man didn't get here till 3 million years ago, and he didn't start wearing shoes till 5,000 years ago. One geologist said, well, maybe aliens visited the planet 500 million years ago. Oh yeah, aliens, man, they'll do it every time. Or another fellow said, maybe there was a larger trilobite shaped like a shoe that fell on a smaller one. Well, there are some big trilobites, but they're not shaped like a shoe. I think 2 Peter's got the best explanation for the whole thing. The scoffers are willingly ignorant. You would have to have help to be that dumb. You couldn't do it on your own. You'd have to go to college for years to be that stupid. Trilobite shaped like a shoe. Anyway, they talk about these index fossils. If you took this rock to any university, USA, or around the world generally, showed this rock to a geologist and said, how old is this rock? He would look at the rock and notice it contains a fossil called a graptolite. He would say, ah, no problem. This as an index fossil. This rock is 570 million years old. That's how they were dated until 3 years ago, when they found graptolites still alive in the South Pacific. Well, now, if they're still alive, maybe they lived between 500 million years ago and today. And maybe they could be found in any rock layer. Huh? There's no such thing as an index fossil. The whole thing is baloney. There might even be some trilobites still alive in the deep Pacific, Peruvian Trench. No, this index fossil is a bunch of baloney. Those layers are not different ages. Here's a petrified tree standing straight up, running through a whole bunch of rock layers. Well, now think about that for just a minute. If that top layer is 5 million years old, and the bottom layer is 600 million years old, you got only two choices that I can figure out. Either that tree stood there for 595 million years and didn't rot or fall down, or it grew through 75 feet of solid rock looking for sunlight. Which do you prefer? I got a better explanation. During the flood, the standing tree trunks got covered by thousands of layers of sediment in less than a year before it could rot. Petrified trees standing straight up are a very common feature. They're found all over the world. It's called a polystratifossil. They find them all the time. This one turned to coal, standing straight up. Polystratifossils. The geologists don't know what to do with them. They have a special book called Geologic Enigmas. Things we don't quite understand. I have the book. 820 pages of it. I can tell them it's no problem at all. These petrified trees are standing up because the flood did that. Anyway, Charles Darwin read the book by Charles Lyell. Don't get the two Charlies confused now. We got Charles Darwin and Charles Lyell. You can call them Chuck 1 and Chuck 2, or Chuckles for short. But Charles Darwin graduated from Bible college. Same time this book was published. Charles Darwin was a dud at everything he did. If we had 6 hours, we'd talk about Charlie Darwin. He was a loser. He was afraid to bait a hook. He couldn't put the worm on the hook, but he loved fishing. He had to have somebody else bait the hook for him, put the worm on. He hated birds because they were mean to worms. He shot every bird he could find. Just a screwball kind of a fellow. Anyway, he was a dud at everything he did. His dad was worried he would never get a job, so his dad sent him off to Bible college to be a preacher in the Anglican church because they don't have to work for a living. The state supported. Charlie graduated from Bible college, still didn't have a job, 22 years old. So his dad sent him off on board HMS Beagle to sail around for 5 years and collect birds for somebody back in England. While Charlie sailed around on board the Beagle, he brought with some books to read. He brought with his Bible, of course. I mean, he just got out of Bible college. And he brought with this book right here, Principles of Geology by Charles Lyell, hot off the press. As Darwin read this book, he began to lose faith in the Bible. When he came back from the voyage 5 years later, he was a skeptic, a scoffer. Later, he claimed to be an atheist. And the best research says he did not repent on his deathbed. His wife started the story that he had, and that story still circulates today. People pass out tracts, you know, Darwin repented on his deathbed. Apparently that's not true. His wife made up the whole thing. But as Charlie sailed around, he came to the coast of Ecuador, South America, out to the Galapagos Islands. There on the Galapagos Islands, Charlie counted 14 different kinds of finches. Their beak shapes were different. Charlie looked at all the finches, studied them for quite a while. He said, you know what? I think all of these finches came from a common ancestor. I bet you're right, Charlie. And I bet it was a bird. And then Charlie concluded, you know, if these finches produce such a variety of beak shapes, maybe that proves that the finches have the same ancestor as the tomatoes. What? What? Slow down now. Try that again. You see 14 kinds of beaks on the birds, and that proves birds and tomatoes have a common ancestor? I don't think so. You see, what Charlie observed is what is sometimes called microevolution. I've learned the hard way, if you're going to get into a debate on evolution, you must first define the terms. What do you mean by the term evolution? It has two very different and unrelated meanings. Microevolution would tell us that dogs produce a variety of dogs, or birds produce a variety of birds. That's what Charlie noticed. That's very observant, Charlie. Very good. Roses produce a variety of roses. That's all true. Microevolution is observable, it is scientific, it's also scriptural. The Bible says they bring forth after their kind. Still the same kind of animal. Did you know nobody has ever seen a dog produce a non-dog? Never been observed. We've seen a lot of crazy varieties, but nobody's ever seen a non-dog come out of the dog family. Macroevolution, however, is assumed. They assume that because we see these little changes, that proves the dog and the rose have a common ancestor. Nothing could be further from the truth. See, what they've done is they've confused the kids into thinking that examples of microevolution help to prove macroevolution. No relation between the two. Actually, over here to the right side, this is just variation. They asked me to speak at a college in Boston one time. They said I could come speak on creation if their professors could ask me any questions they wanted. I said, that'd be fine with me. I got my charts out. I said, folks, here's 6 professors and all their students in the room. I said, folks, the Bible says 6,000 years ago God made everything, and 4,400 years ago there was a flood. After the flood, the animals got off the ark, and they had kids and grandkids, and began to be a lot of varieties. Some liked warm climates, some liked cold climates, and they began to adapt to those, you know, climates within limits. There's adaptations available. And here we are today. Then I shared with them what they're taught. 20 billion years ago, there was a big bang. 4.6 billion years ago, the earth cooled down, developed a hard rocky crust, and then slowly it rained on the rocks for billions of years and turned them into soup. And the soup came alive about 3 billion years ago. One professor raised his hand. He said, Mr. Hovind, there are 250 varieties of dogs in the world today. You mean to tell me that all the dogs in the world came from just 2 dogs off of Noah's Ark? Ha ha ha. You expect me to believe that? I said, sir, would you look at what you're teaching your students? You're teaching your students that all the dogs in the world came from a rock. He didn't have any more questions. That's exactly what they teach, isn't it? Yeah. If you can ever get them to boil away the fluff and the feathers and quit using them big words, they believe we came from a rock. They have to believe that. There's no way out of the argument. Now, I was at a school a couple of months ago, and one lady, a teacher, biology teacher, she was so mad. She said, "You kept saying we come from a rock. We don't believe that." I said, "You don't?" She said, "No. We came from a macromolecule." Oh. I said, "Where'd the macromolecule come from?" "From this premadoral soup." I said, "Where'd the soup come from?" "Well, it rained on the rocks." Slowly it dawned on her. She believes we came from a rock. Never thought of that before. That's what they believe. I like showing this picture to evolutionists. Mount Rushmore, world's largest rock group. You got a slow crowd here, brother. Ask him this question. Say, "Mr. Evolutionist, do you believe there's any possible way that erosion, wind, rain, exfoliation, natural processes could have formed those four faces on that rock?" They'll say, "Impossible. It'll never happen." All right? Now let me ask you this. Do you believe the men that it represents happened by chance? They do, don't they? They don't believe their face could come on a rock by chance, but yet their whole complex anatomy could come by chance? If you believe that, I just got one question for you. Are you dumb in any other area? Or is that the only one you're dumb in? What else do we need to watch out for about you? Had to be designed, folks. There's no options. You know, I come from Illinois, Peoria, Illinois, corn country. There's so many kinds of corn, they have to number them. You drive down the highway and you'll see XL 104-7. You know, don't dare mix it up with XL 102-9. Something will blow up. But you can crossbreed your corn from now till the cows come home, and you always get corn. You'll never get a hamster or a tomato or a whale to grow on that corn stalk. It won't happen. Okay? All you're going to get is a variety of corn. You might get bigger or smaller, but it's still corn. The Bible says they bring forth after its kind. You know, that phrase appears 10 times in the first chapter in Genesis. Right. Apparently God wanted us to get the message. He figured most of us would make it through at least the first chapter in our family devotions. 10 times he put it in there. They bring forth after their kind. There's varieties of cows, all sorts of cows. And they probably came from a common ancestor. And it was a cow. That's not evolution. That's a variation. That's all it is. And you can ask any farmer who raises anything about the varieties available. He'll say, "Oh, there's all sorts of varieties." But the further you get away from the norm, the more problems you have. You might get a cow that gives more milk or better beef or heat resistance like the Brahma, but you're going to have some problems like disease resistance goes down, right? You might get a specialized breed of dog like a German Shepherd that has some very desirable traits, but you start to get some problems like hip dysplasia, right? If you turned all the dogs in the world loose back into the woods, 95% of them wouldn't make it first couple of weeks, would they? How long would the Chihuahuas last out there?
Till lunch.
Yeah, till lunch. Come on. He'd come up to the wolf. Yep, 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 crunch. Gone, man. Yeah, there's a lot of varieties, but most of the dog varieties have been produced by man for a particular purpose. They're selective breeding, not natural selection. Anyway, there's all sorts of varieties. There's even mutations. Here's a cow with an extra leg growing out of the back. 5-legged cow. Can't run any faster. See, mutations are harmful or fatal or neutral. And mutations only give you a scrambled version of what you already had. Notice the cow did not get a feather or a wing or a beak. He got an extra leg. He already had legs. Mutations do not give you anything new. They scramble up the information already there. Very important point, because evolutionists rely on mutations to get evolution around. They'll say mutations are the source of variation. In a nutshell, the evolutionists believe mutations produce something new, which we've never seen, and then natural selection weeded out the rest of them and let the new one survive. Well, we've never seen anything new produced by a mutation. All we've seen is scrambled versions of what we had. They'll say, no, wait a minute now, bacteria become resistant to drugs. Only because one of them already had the resistance to the drugs. It was already in the bacteria. Same thing with rats becoming resistant to poison or anything else. It was already in there. That's not evolution, folks. There's a short-legged sheep, a mutation. Look what the textbook says. This mutation would not last in nature. Of course not, man. He's the first one the wolf is going to catch. Go, boys, go. Here comes the wolf. Herman didn't make it, did he? Nope. Mutations happen. Here's a two-headed turtle. That's a mutation. He's going to freeze first winter. Nobody makes a double-neck turtleneck sweater. Huh? Ever seen one? No. They don't make them. No. So mutations are harmful or fatal. That's all they are. They're useless for evolution. See, scrambling up the letters from the word Christmas will give you a whole variety of words. You can make hundreds of words out of those letters. But you will never get Xerox, zebra, or queen out of those letters, will you?
That's right.
And you will never get something new out of a mutation. You just get a scrambled version of what you had. So don't tell the kids that mutations are going to cause evolution. They're not going to cause any such thing. But the textbooks have whole chapters, whole units sometimes, on this evolution theory. They're going to say, boys and girls, we have evidence of evolution from fossils. We'll see about that in a minute. We have evidence from structure. Ooh, homology argument. We'll see about that too. Evidence from molecular biology. Ooh, big word. That'll be on the test. Molecular biology. Write that down. Okay. Evidence from development. Natural selection. What are they going to show the kids in your textbooks anyway? I don't know how you folks do it in your state, but in my state, in Florida, Pensacola, Florida, we have a law that says, Florida Statute 233.09 says, instructional materials, textbooks, should be accurate. Would anybody disagree with that law? That's fair, isn't it? Don't you think textbooks ought to be accurate? We don't want to lie to the kids, do we? No, of course not. Well, let's see if they're accurate tonight. Are we teaching the kids a lie? Are we trying to educate or are we trying to indoctrinate? Major difference, you know. Alabama did something neat. They passed a resolution that said, if a textbook teaches evolution, you must have a warning sticker in the front cover. Here it is right here on the table. If your textbook teaches the evolution theory, you must have this warning label in the front. Caution, hazardous to your health. This teaches evolution. I think that's at least a start. Like a pack of cigarettes ought to have that, right? You ought to warn the kids, this may ruin your faith. I think every state needs to have something like that. That's a start in the right direction. Better yet, let's just get all the false information out of the books. I don't want to get creation into the classroom. It's not what I'm trying to do. I just want the books to be accurate. So don't say I'm trying to get the Bible into the public schools. People say, should we have the Bible in the public schools? I say, you know, that's a good question, but there's another question we need to ask first. Should we have public schools? Now let's discuss that one for a while first. Then we'll discuss what should be in them. If we should have them, we certainly should not have them run from Washington. 10th Amendment to the Constitution is pretty plain, folks. Anything not spelled out in this document is left to the states or to the people. First thing I'd do if I was president is shut down the Department of Education.
Amen.
Make them guys get an honest job, picking peaches or changing tires or something. The government has no business being involved in education, but we'll see why later on. It's very important that we have a government school system for the New World Order. We'll get into that a little bit later. Anyway, textbooks are going to say natural selection and evolution go together. What? Natural selection? This book says natural selection causes evolution? Now, wait a minute. Nature selects the strongest to survive, generally. That's a fact. But that's not going to cause any evolution. It's only going to keep the species strong. That's all it can do. It can't create a species. It can just keep it strong. That's all it'll do. Natural selection is like having, you've got a factory where they make cars. I worked at General Motors building trucks for a couple of years. The truck comes down the assembly line. When they get all done, at the end, they check it, right? If it don't run, they reject it, right? If you have a reject system at the end of your assembly line, which every business does that prove nobody's building the trucks? No. And if God has a system in place where the weaker ones are weeded out, that doesn't prove nobody built the critters to begin with. That logic is full of holes. But that's what they're trying to tell the kids. Because nature selects the strongest to survive, nobody built the animals. That's stupid. Yeah, somebody built them. See, survival of the fittest does not explain arrival of the fittest. It doesn't tell you how it got there. It just tells you which one survives, that's all. And folks, it's not always survival of the fittest. If a whale goes through a school of fish and eats 80% of them, it ain't survival of the fittest. It's survival of the luckiest. Right? I mean, when a snake crawls into a nest and eats 3 out of 4 eggs from the bird, he doesn't know which one was going to be the fittest bird. He just ate 3 eggs, that's all. So survival of the fittest is not always true. It's survival of the luckiest most of the time. Anyway, textbooks are going to say the fruit flies proved evolution. You know, they raised fruit flies in the laboratory. They raised 80,000 generations of flies. They nuked them, they microwaved them, they x-rayed them. They did everything you can do to them flies to cause them to have mutated babies. They got flies with curled wings. They fly around, bzzz, couldn't go anywhere. They got flies with red eyes and white eyes and brown eyes. They got flies with no wings. What do you call that? A crawl? Can't fly. They got all kinds of mutated flies. After raising 80,000 generations of flies, somebody wrote a report. He said, ladies and gentlemen, we've raised 80,000 generations of flies, at taxpayer expense, by the way. We've seen millions of mutations, but, he said, we've never seen a beneficial mutation. All the flies we got were worse off than great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa fly. Therefore, he said, we must conclude that flies have evolved about as far as they can go. Excuse me, teacher. There might be two ways to look at that. How fast was that calf going, anyway? Maybe you just proved that God made flies right to begin with. Wouldn't that be a reasonable conclusion to draw from the data? Boy, they don't want that conclusion, do they? No, no, no. They're going to tell the boys and girls the peppered moth proves evolution. You ever see that in your textbooks, peppered moth? Somebody in England went around and counted the moths on the trees. Must have been a government project. They discovered it was 95% light moths and 5% black. Exactly the same species, just a different color, that's all. Then they started burning coal in the factories, and the trees turned black from the soot. So they counted the trees, the moths again. You know, renewed their grant. And found out it was now 95% black moths and 5% light. They said, wow, would you look at this? That white moth evolved into a black moth. No. No, no, no. You see, when the tree turned black, the white moth lost his camouflage, and he stuck out like a sore thumb, and he got ate by a bird. And the black moth had more babies that survived. That's all that happened. And when they quit burning coal, the trees turned light again, and it shifted right back to light moths. And this is listed as one of the best examples known for evolution. It started off a moth, it ended up a moth. That proves we came from a rock. They even have the kids do activities. Boys and girls, get a large sheet of black paper, 1 meter square. Hey, by the way, folks, I like to kick this dog every time I walk by. Did you know all the new textbooks are metric only?
Yes.
All of them I've seen. No mention of the English system anymore. I think they're preparing the kids for a new world order. Now, I understand the metric system thoroughly, okay? I taught physics. I'll take a metric quiz against anybody you know. But I'm not sure I want a kid coming to help build my house that doesn't know what a 2x4 is. So if you're a patriot, make your paper 39.37 inches instead, okay? And then get 200 black circles and 200 white circles and throw them on the paper. Now, boys and girls, see who can pick up the most in 1 minute. Well, of course you're going to pick up the white circles off the black paper. Don't be a rocket scientist to figure that out. They're going to say, see, this proves evolution.
Ow.
It does? No, teacher, I think this proves we have extra money to waste in our school district. We just cut up a whole bunch of good paper and threw it on the floor. Now we got to pay the janitor to come in and get the ones we couldn't find. You know, I think it's pretty smart of the Creator to give that moth the ability to produce a variety of babies so some will survive regardless of what happens to the environment. That's called intelligent design. The peppered moth is a classic example of creation, not evolution. Giving it a variety. Did you know General Motors puts a heater and an air conditioner in some of their cars? They do. I've seen them. Is that dumb? No. That's called planning ahead, right? Some go to warm climates, some go to cold climates. And God gave the moth the ability to produce a variety because He's planning ahead. That's what that means. They're going to say, now, boys and girls, similarity of body structure proves evolution. You see, you have two bones in your wrist, the radius and the ulna. I know about that. I broke both of mine a couple times. Did you know, boys and girls, the dolphin has two bones in his flipper? And guess what? They're called the radius and the ulna.
That proves it.
Who named them, teacher? The dolphin? No. By the way, the bat has two bones in his wing. And, believe it or not, the horse has two bones in the forelimb. And they're called the radius and the ulna. Textbook says, comparative anatomy provides further evidence of evolution. What? The commonality suggests that these animals are all related. They probably evolved from a common ancestor. Oh, wait a minute. Might be two ways to look at that now. How fast was that calf going anyway? Maybe this proves they all have a common designer.
Yep.
Maybe the same God designed them all. Hey, did you know the lug nuts from a Chevy will screw onto a Pontiac? They will. That proves they both evolved from a Honda 40 million years ago. Now, look, you got to be bright enough to figure this out. What they have just done is a classic case of deceit. They have given the kids a good observation and a faulty conclusion. It's a good observation. They got similar body structure. Wrong conclusion. It doesn't prove they have a common ancestor. It might prove they got a common designer. Yeah. They're going to say, boys and girls, the human embryo, between the 4th and 6th week, a human embryo changes from a fish-like organism. Is the human embryo a fish? No. That's what they're telling them, isn't it? To one indistinguishable from an embryonic monkey. They're going to say the embryo of the human has gill pouches. You know, gills like a fish? Those little folds of skin they're calling gill pouches. That is a bunch of baloney. Those just are folds of skin. They later develop into the masseter muscle, the sternocleidomastoid, the larynx. It has nothing to do with breathing. I've seen fat people that have 5 or 6 chins. They can't breathe through any of them but the top one. Those are not gill pouches. They're just folded up skin, that's all. You know, this whole thing was made up by a guy named Ernst Haeckel back in 1869. Ernst Haeckel hated the Bible. He lived right after Darwin's book came out. He got so excited, he said, I'm going to promote evolution all over Germany. Ernst Haeckel. He lied. He did all sorts of mean things. And if you want to get an article about him, it's in the March 96 edition of Creation magazine. This is not that edition, but call Creation magazine from Ken Ham's ministry, Answers in Genesis in Florence, Kentucky, 800-350-3232. And everybody ought to get this magazine if you're interested in creation. Tremendous. Anyway, the March to May, I think it is, edition of Creation magazine tells about Ernst Haeckel and how he lied. He took the drawings of a human embryo at 4 weeks of development, right here, and a dog at 4 weeks of development. He totally changed the drawings so they would look very similar. Here's what he ended up with when he got done. What? He went from this to this. Real accurate artist, wasn't he? He lied purposely. It was proven in 1874 that he lied. He didn't ever admit it until 1911. He finally admitted it, reluctantly. But did you know Ernst Haeckel's drawings are still in textbooks today? They were proven wrong 120 years ago. Talk about the gill slits on the human. Those are not gill slits, folks. They covered in the college textbooks. Gill pouches and a tail on a human. That is deceitful. That's been proven wrong 120 years ago. You know why it's kept in the textbooks, though? That's the only way you can justify abortion. It's not a human yet, it's just a fish, right? That's what they're teaching them. The phrase is, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, which means, as the baby develops inside the mother, it goes through the stages of evolution. Fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal. Memorize the word farm and you got it. Fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal. That's what they teach. That's a bunch of baloney. That's a lie. They're trying to justify abortion. They're going to say it's not a human yet. Oh, it's human the instant it's conceived. And abortion is murder. Yep. Plain and simple. You might have heard of the little girl, Anna Rosa. She had her arm chopped off in a botched abortion. She was born anyway. Ask an abortionist, say, what do you think happened to Anna Rosa? Is that bad? They say, oh, that's terrible, terrible. Then ask them this question. Suppose they'd cut her head off instead. It would have been fine, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. Folks, it's human the instant it's conceived. Now, I come from Pensacola, Florida. You might have heard of my town. We've had 5 abortion clinics, I think. Several abortion clinics burned down. 2 doctors shot and killed. I didn't shoot any doctors, and I didn't burn any clinics down. And I don't think Jesus would do it that way either, by the way. He grew up under Roman control. He didn't go around blowing up tanks and burning down bridges. But I'm sure he saw plenty of things he would have liked to have fixed. Anyway, the doctors, though, were murderers. When the first doctor was shot, I happened to be in Fort Lauderdale preaching down there. I was flying back the next day. On the plane, right in front of me, were 2 of the ladies, 2 of the women from NOW, National Organization for Wild Women. They're going to come up to Pensacola and have a big rally, you know, march around town, hold up their signs, pro-choice, pro-choice. Have you noticed the textbooks and the news media always call them pro-choice? And they call us the anti-abortion? Nobody wants to be an anti-anything. It's kind of a little negative jab they put in there. Why, what happened to pro-life? You'll never see them use that term. Very rarely use pro-life. It's always anti-abortion. How about if we call us pro-life and call them pro-death? Yeah. Anyway, as we're getting off the plane, I noticed these 2 ladies, these 2 women, had on their shirt in huge block letters, choice above all. So, being my mild-mannered self, I said, excuse me, ma'am, what does this mean, choice above all? She said, we believe a woman ought to have a right to choose. I said, choose what? She said, choose to have an abortion. It's her body, you know. I said, well, yeah, if she wants to abort her body, that's fine. But she wants to abort somebody else's body, don't she? Yeah. Never thought about that one, did they? No. I said, well, ma'am, I'm kind of curious about this subject. I've got 3 kids. I delivered one of them at home. I taught biology and anatomy, and I used to raise hamsters. I'm kind of familiar with this process. I said, tell me, why does the woman's right to choose stop at birth? I mean, if it's right to choice you're worried about, let's let her choose to kill the baby after it's born. It would be much safer and simpler. I got an idea. Let's extend abortion rights up until the kid's 2 years old. I know a lot of mothers with a 2-year-old have thought about it a time or two. Hey, I got a brilliant idea, folks. Let's extend abortion rights up until the kid's 18. I bet they'd behave a lot better. Look, son, one more time and I'm going to abort you. Teacher, where's Johnny today? Well, Johnny didn't do his homework last night, so his mommy aborted him. I'm telling you, grades would go way up. No, it's murder, folks, murder. You know the logic they use to justify abortion, though? It's silly. Look at it. They're going to say, it's not human. That's a lie. That's based on some bad science from 120 years ago. Now get up to date. It's human the instant it's conceived. Quit lying to the kids, okay? They're going to say, well, it's not viable. It can't live on its own. Well, neither are you stark naked on the North Pole. Huh? Is it viable after it's born? Lay it on the sidewalk for a couple of months. Let's see how long it lives. Just because they can't live on their own means we have the right to kill it? I know kids that are 35 that still go borrow money from Dad. Huh? Hey, Dad, can I borrow some money? You ought to be able to live on your own by now, son. That's stupid. How about this? The child may be unwanted. Well, there's kids that are already born that are unwanted. Should we kill them? My parents moved 4 times when I was growing up, but I found them every time. How about this? The child may be a financial burden. Oh, show me a kid that's not. Every kid's a financial burden. How about this? It may be from rape or incest. Well, then kill the rapist, not the baby. Execute the rapist and adopt out the baby. Case closed. How come we always have to abort the baby? Why don't we abort the mother once in a while and keep the baby? Huh? Nobody has to die in all this. So she may not want it, we'll give it to somebody who would. Lots of people would love to adopt a baby, even if it was from rape or incest. A lady came up to me about a year ago at a church I was at, holding a little 4-year-old boy on her shoulder. She said, Mr. Hovind, Jimmy wants to shake your hand. I said, hi, Jimmy, how you doing? He said, Mr. Hovind, I sure like watching your tapes. 4 years old. He said, I like dinosaurs. She said, Mr. Hovind, you're shaking the hand of a miracle. I said, really? She said, yep, Jimmy's mother was on her way to have an abortion, and we talked her out of it and adopted him. I just broke down crying right there. It's murder, folks. Well, the women did not want to talk about it anymore, so I went down and got my luggage and got a taxi, waiting for a taxi, you know. I started talking to a cameraman. He showed up to film the rally. You know, it's amazing. 6 people are going to march around town, and it's going to make worldwide news. You can get 100,000 people to line the streets against abortion, and it won't make the news. Have you noticed that? Maybe it's time Christians cancel their subscriptions to the newspapers and shut off their cable TV. Maybe they'll start to get the message when the money stops flowing in. That's the only language they speak, by the way. Anyway, I got talking to this cameraman, and I said, hey, I just got into town. I heard about the doctor getting shot yesterday. I think there's 2 things wrong with what happened to this doctor. The cameraman said, oh, really? What's wrong with all this? I said, well, there should have been a trial first. Nobody should be shot without a fair trial. I said, secondly, the state of Florida should have shot him after the trial, or maybe electric chair, I don't know, wouldn't have to be shooting, but it shouldn't have been Griffith. If you don't understand my position on abortion, see me later, I'll try to clarify it for you. It's murder. We have gone nuts, folks. Why do we allow this to go on in our country? What's the matter with us? I've often asked people this question. I don't have an answer for it. Let me ask you, let this one haunt you like it haunts me. If somebody had broken into one of Hitler's concentration camps and shot some of his guards and rescued some Jews, would he be a good guy or a bad guy? Think about that one. 1936, Germany declared Jews as non-persons. They say abortion's legal. That's their logic. It was legal to kill the Jews in Germany. They were not persons. So when Hitler's guards killed the Jews by the thousands, and later by the hundreds of thousands, and finally by the millions, it was perfectly legal. Let me ask you a question. Did that logic hold up at the Nuremberg trial? No, it didn't. And you abortionists, your logic is not going to hold up at God's trial either.
Amen.
Now, it's not the unpardonable sin. You can be forgiven, but don't go around justifying it. Confess it as murder. If you've had an abortion, God still loves you. Moses was a murderer. King David was a murderer. It's okay. God still loves you. You can be forgiven. But don't go around trying to justify it. Call it what it is. You may have heard of Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. You know, Planned Parenthood in 1952 published this document talking about every child a wanted child. That's always been their slogan. Margaret Sanger was a racist. She hated black people, hated Hispanics, hated anybody who wasn't white Aryan. She was a racist, big time. Her purpose in starting Planned Parenthood was to eventually put these clinics into undesirable neighborhoods and wipe out the blacks, the Jews, the Hispanics by sterilizing them so they wouldn't have any more kids and they'd die off. That was the real purpose behind Margaret Sanger's work. In 1952, they published a document about birth control, answering questions. Is it an abortion? Definitely not. An abortion requires an operation. It kills the life of a baby after it has begun. Boy, Planned Parenthood has changed their tune, haven't they? Now 300 million of your tax dollars goes to support Planned Parenthood. 300 million. Maybe we ought to defund them too while we're at it, huh?
Yep.
Yeah. And execute those that have been involved in the murders of the babies.
That's right.
Folks, it's murder. We have just gone crazy in this country. Textbooks are going to tell the kids we have vestigial organs. A vestigial organ. They say the appendix is a vestigial organ. In other words, we don't need it anymore. Yes, you do need your appendix. Now, you can live without it. You can live without your right arm, too. Doesn't prove you don't need it. You know, if the appendix is taken out, the rest of the system has to work harder, that's all.
That's right.
There's no such thing as a vestigial organ. But the textbooks show the kids this as proof for evolution. They talk about vestigial organs. They say the whale has a vestigial pelvis. That is not a vestigial pelvis. It is necessary for the whale to reproduce. Muscles anchor to those bones. That's not a vestigial pelvis. We'll talk about some more things in the textbooks in just a few seconds and share with you some things about how they lie to the kids to promote their theory. Don't fall for it, and you better learn the truth and be prepared to help your kids know the truth about this subject. I think it is deceitful to teach kids things that are simply not true. The textbook says the whale has a vestigial pelvis. That's not a vestigial pelvis. It's necessary for the whales to reproduce. The muscles have to anchor to those bones. It's not vestigial. So the author that wrote this is either stupid about his whale anatomy and ought not be writing a biology textbook, or he's a liar. No other choice. This textbook says the humans have a tailbone that is of no apparent use. No apparent use. You know, I had a debate in North Alabama with the president of the North Alabama Atheist Association or something like that. I forget what his title was, but he got up and he said, folks, we've got proof for evolution. Vestigial organs like the human tailbone. You don't need it anymore. When it was my turn, I got up and I said, sir, I taught biology and anatomy. I happen to know there are 9 muscles that attach to the tailbone, without which you cannot perform some very valuable functions. I will not tell you what they all are, but trust me, you need them muscles. However, I said, if you believe the tailbone is vestigial, I, Kent Hovind, will pay to have yours removed. Put up or shut up. Within 24 hours of having your tailbone removed, you would realize, oh man, that was a mistake. You're going to go home and read your Grey's Anatomy and figure out what they do, but trust me, you need them muscles. Don't have that tail. Have you ever broken or bruised your tailbone? You'll find out what it's for. Whew. Don't take that thing out. You need it. Now, it's pretty small, I understand, but you need it. A lot of things are small. They talk about vestigial organs. By the way, vestigial organs would be an example of losing something, not gaining something. That's the opposite of what evolution needs, right? So even if it's true, and it's not true, but even if it was true, it's still not proof for evolution. It's the opposite direction. Textbooks talk about animals adapting to their environment. This is a code word, adaptations. They use this word so they can avoid using the word designed. It's pretty obvious things are designed, but they don't want to use that word because then some kid might say, hey, who's the designer? Ooh, they don't want that. So they use the word adapted instead. Watch for that. It's in all the textbooks, all the nature programs, all that kind of stuff. Adapted. Would you say that a 15-inch tire has adapted to fit 15-inch rims over millions of years? No. I think it was designed, don't you? I think the animals were designed for their environment. Now, it's true they have adaptability. They can adapt to cold weather or warm weather. I understand that. But the adaptations have limits. Haven't the farmers been trying to raise bigger and bigger pigs? They work really hard at trying to get bigger pigs. You know, I bet there's a limit. I bet they'll never get a pig as big as Illinois. They won't, will they? Somewhere between the size they are now and the state of Illinois, there is a limit they will not cross. Adaptations do work, but they have limits, and the evolutionist doesn't want to admit any limits to the adaptations. But any farmer that raises anything will tell you there are definite limits, and there are problems the further you get from the norm. And in the wild, it would never happen. The environment can only make a few minor changes, that's all it can do. Miller and Urey wanted to know how the Earth and solar system had come to be, the textbook says. I could have told them, man, it says right here, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. No problem with that one. But Urey didn't want to believe that. So he made up a mixture of Earth's primitive atmosphere. By the way, it was a fake. He used methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, water vapor. The Earth has always had oxygen. All the rocks clear down to the bottom of the so-called geologic column have oxidation in them, oxidized rock. But he knew he couldn't have any free oxygen because it would oxidize his new life form and kill it. So you can't have oxygen for life to evolve. But if you don't have oxygen, you don't have ozone. And if you don't have ozone, you get ultraviolet light, and it destroys any life that does form. Which means life can't evolve with oxygen, and it can't evolve without oxygen. I think that means it can't evolve.
Yep.
God had to make it. Pretty simple for me to figure out. He never proved how life originated. The experiment was a flop. All he made was a few amino acids. And he had to carefully trap those. Had a very elaborate setup to trap the amino acids. By the way, half of them were right-handed and half of them were left-handed amino acids. It's like letters of the alphabet. If they're backwards, they're not right. You can make a letter R and make it backwards like the Russians do, and it's not an English letter. So having amino acids both ways was a flop. And yet you've got to get thousands of these amino acids in the exact precise sequence to make any sense, to make a protein. Is it possible you could drop 50 letters on the floor and make a word? Pretty unlikely, but I suppose it could happen. What's the probability of dropping 10,000 letters on the floor and making a sentence? Spelled correctly. All the letters right way. Real slim, right? Now what's the probability of dropping letters on the floor and making Webster's dictionary? 0, right? It ain't going to happen. But that is the chance that the evolutionists are counting on, that it might have happened. The difference between an amino acid and life is greater than the difference between a letter of the alphabet and Webster's dictionary. See, life is more than just chemicals in a certain order, folks. If all they have to have is chemicals in a certain order to make life, go to the mortuary. You got all the chemicals in the right order. Raise the dead. Huh? It'd be lots easier to raise the dead than to start with amino acids and make life. But the textbook says, many important events occurred during the Archean era, the most important of which was the evolution of life. They're going to tell the kids at your expense that life just happened by chance. That is totally unscientific. That is somebody's religion. You're welcome to believe that. If you believe that, I don't care. That's fine. You can believe in the Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, evolution. I don't care what you believe in. But I do care if you're going to spend my tax dollars to spread this around to other kids. Now I do care. So you can spend your money however you want. But they want to spend my money to brainwash kids with a lie. That's a bunch of baloney. That's a religion. They say we can't have religion in the schools. We've got religion in the schools. We just don't have Christianity in the schools anymore, that's all. Textbook says, humans probably evolved from bacteria. I didn't write this, folks. I told you I collect the books. I just take the pictures, that's all. And they lived more than 4 billion years ago. Was your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather a bacteria? That's what they're telling them. You see, you know why they want them to believe that? This is the devil doing this. He knows if man believes we were created in God's image and fell, we need a Savior. But if we started off like a bacteria and evolved, we don't need a Savior. We are becoming gods ourselves, right? Satan said to Eve, ye shall be as gods. First lie he told her. Textbook Heath Biology says the humans and the birds and the crocodiles and the dinosaurs have a common ancestor. I resent paying for that. But millions of kids have learned that and had to be tested on it. If you teach that, you're going to wreck some kid's faith in the Bible. And Jesus said, whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. You're in trouble when you face God. I would hate to be a teacher who taught evolution and have to stand before God and answer for all the kids that lost their faith in the Bible, or kids that never got saved, or the kids that they could have led to the Lord and influenced. How many millions are going to be in hell because some teacher is teaching that theory? You're going to be in trouble when you face God. And you will face God. Every one of us will. Holt Biology has a whole unit on evolution here. 5 chapters. What are they going to teach the kids? They're going to say, Glencoe Biology here says, all the many forms of life on earth today are descended from a common ancestor. Excuse me, wouldn't that be saying that the finches and the tomatoes have a common ancestor? I wasn't exaggerating, folks. All forms of life have a common ancestor. That's what it says. It's found in a population of primitive unicellular organisms. What is a primitive unicellular organism? There ain't no such thing. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then it says, no traces of those events remain. That's real handy, huh? We know what happened, boys and girls, but there's no proof. Try that one in a court of law. See how far you get. All the forms. What's a primitive unicellular organism anyway? Just because something is single-celled does not mean it is primitive or simple. Did you know a paramecium is more complicated than the space shuttle? And you can fit thousands of those into a drop of water. Smaller is not simpler. That's a big giant flaw in their logic. See, they have now got microchips that go inside of a paperclip. Smaller is more complicated. Doesn't mean it's simpler, it means it's more complex. The little paramecium eats, gives off wastes, moves around, reproduces, responds to its environment. He does all that in one cell. It takes your body 50 trillion cells to accomplish those same functions. Smaller is more complicated. Ah, they got it backwards. Did you know the brain of a honeybee is pretty small? Especially when you compare it to NASA's Cray computer. You know the Cray computer is the largest, fastest computer in the world. The YMP C90, the world's fastest. NASA has 7 of them. They're using our money to buy them, so they don't care. But the Cray computer can do about 6 billion calculations per second. Pretty fast. Estimates are that the little honeybee's brain has to do 1 trillion calculations per second. See, it takes a lot of calculations to fly, right? How many muscles have to be coordinated for the critter to fly? His brain's got to sort all that out, right? His brain also has to keep his heart beating, has to keep his lungs working, has to keep his navigation system working by the magnetic field, has to keep all of his body cells being reproduced. He's got a lot to think about. That little brain is going pretty fast. That means the honeybee's brain is about 166 times faster than a Cray computer. What about the energy consumption? Well, the Cray computer uses lots of energy. It's got a big power line going in to feed that thing. Honeybee uses 10 microwatts. Did you know a honeybee not only flies on honey, I mean, he not only makes honey, he flies on it for energy. And a honeybee can fly 1,000,000 miles on 1 gallon of honey. Let me see you make something that gets 1,000,000 miles per gallon. Huh? My Heavenly Father did. Yep. What about the cost? Well, the brain of a honeybee is pretty cheap. Man, you splat them on your windshield all the time. Cray computer costs $48 million. What about the maintenance personnel? When the Cray goes down, everybody scrambles, right? What about when the honeybee needs fixing? He heals himself. Let me see you get a computer that heals itself. Huh? What about the weight? Well, the Cray weighs 2,300 pounds with the cooling system that is essential. Honeybee's brain doesn't weigh very much. What's the conclusions? Well, let's see, the Cray is big, it's slow, it's clumsy, it's immovable. Everybody has to babysit the dumb thing. It had to be designed. Right? What about the honeybee? Smaller, faster, mobile, heals itself? You think it evolved? I just have one question, if you believe that. Are you dumb in any other area? Or is that the only one? And the brain of a human is a zillion times more complicated than a honeybee. You know, you can walk into a room and look around the room, and in 1 second, your brain processes enough information to keep the Cray computer busy for 1,000 years. Your brain does in a second what the Cray does in 1,000 years. And you think it happened by chance? You're dreaming. Just plain dreaming. You're wrong. God designed you and me. Just admit it. Quit running. God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I admit you're the Savior. You're the Creator. Every knee shall bow someday. I'd rather do it now. I enjoy getting to talk and walk and know my Heavenly Father. We have a blast. He's not always happy with what I do, but He's willing to forgive if I ask Him. It's really wonderful being God's child. I'm having a wonderful time. You know, the chromosomes, the DNA in your body, deoxyribonucleic acid, called the chromosomes, is considered the most complicated molecule in the universe. The average person has 50 trillion cells in their body. One person. Each cell contains 46 chromosomes. If you extracted all the chromosomes out of your body, you would have 2 tablespoons of DNA chromosomes. That's all you'd have. But each of those chromosomes is about 6 feet long. But it's all coiled up. I mean, it's real, real tiny. But if you stretched it out and tied them all end to end, one person's chromosomes, which will fit into 2 tablespoons, would stretch from Earth to the moon and back 5,000 times. That's the instructions to make you. Yeah. And if you typed out the incredibly complex code found in the DNA, the typed out version of just the instructions that you have in your body right now, those instructions would fill enough books to fill Grand Canyon 40 times. Anybody work with computers at all? Work with computers? I want to see you get 40 Grand Canyons full of books, condense it to software, CD-ROM, SciQuest, I don't care what you use, but when you're done, it must fit into 2 tablespoons. My Heavenly Father did it, and it reproduces itself. You know what the odds are of that happening by chance? 0. You see, you are a copy of 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 Adam, right? Let me see you take any computer program, copy it. Take the copy and copy it again. Take that copy and copy it again. Do that about 1,000 times. And then stick the disks in the computer and see if it runs. That's what God did, folks, when He made Adam. Pretty incredible. The odds of one chromosome coming by chance are 1 times 10 to the 119,000th power. That's a big number. 119,000 zeros behind it. If you think it happened by chance, I'd like to get you to Las Vegas. Man, I could make some money off of you. You'd stand there and bet, man, if I roll these dice long enough, I'm going to get a 13. Come on, 13. Daddy needs a new pair of shoes. Well, you can roll them till you round the corners off. You ain't going to get a 13. And you're not going to get a DNA by chance either. But let's pretend you do, okay? One evolutionist told me, he said, if we can just get one DNA, evolution can take it from there. First place, you're not going to get one. Second place, it couldn't take it from there. But let's pretend, okay? I did some research on this. I figured, hey, the more chromosomes you have, the more complicated you must be. So I arranged a bunch of plants and animals in order based upon the number of chromosomes they have. The more chromosomes, the most complicated molecule there is, the more complicated you should be. I found in my research that penicillin has 2 chromosomes. That's it. Fruit flies have 8. This chart's in my seminar notebook. If you get a set of my tapes, you will get one of the notebooks. And the chart's in there. All my charts are in here. Nothing's copyrighted of mine. You can copy anything you want. But fruit flies have 8. This proves, ladies and gentlemen, that fruit flies evolved from penicillin. And then slowly, that's the secret, slowly, over millions of years, they got a few more chromosomes and they're turned into a tomato. Or a housefly. They're twins, you know. Pretty tough to tell the difference. 12. And then slowly changed from an insect back to a vegetable. Got a garden pea here. And then back to an insect, a honeybee with 16 chromosomes, and then back to a vegetable. Couldn't make up their mind. If evolution takes whatever route it wants to go, you know. And slowly turned into a lettuce and then a carrot. And then one grows above ground, one below. They're both orange except for the lettuce, you know. And then slowly a miracle took place. When we got to 22 chromosomes, we had triplets. Did you know the possum, the redwood tree, and the kidney bean all have 22 chromosomes? You get those 3 together, the average scientist cannot tell which is which. Let's see, which one is the possum? Oh, I don't know. And then slowly, slowly, they added more chromosomes and became a human, 46. Here we are, folks. We made it. And if we can just get 2 more, we're going to become a tobacco plant. Hey, I know some that already smell like it. They're way ahead of us. I get on the elevator once in a while and say, man, you're evolving, aren't you? You're way ahead of me. And then slowly, someday, we might get 2 more and become an amoeba. Wait a minute. I thought they say amoebas turn to humans. Why do amoebas have more chromosomes than we do? Huh? A little confusing, huh? And then slowly, slowly, over the next 14 zillion years, we might get enough chromosomes to turn into a carp. Twice as complicated as we are. Them carps are smart. Just look at them sometime. And then someday, folks, this won't happen in my lifetime, but maybe star date 137492, we might get enough chromosomes to have 480, and we'll become a fern. I was at a church a few months ago. A lady walked up to me, said, Mr. Hovind, I'm fern. I shook hands with that hand right there. I'll never wash it again. I met the ultimate goal of all evolution, folks. You know, I look through textbooks all over the place trying to find out why don't they put the chromosomes in order. Why did I have to make that chart? I couldn't find any textbooks that gave an explanation for the chromosomes. Finally, I found one college textbook, had one little bitty paragraph, 2 sentences long. It said, the chromosome number does not seem to follow the expected evolutionary pattern. Duh. Then they said, therefore, we feel the evidence is irrelevant. Excuse me, are we trying to educate these kids, or are we trying to indoctrinate these kids? What's going on here? Is evolution a sacred theory for some other reason? Oh, it sure is. We'll get into that in a minute. They arranged the animals in order like they did with the horse. How many have ever heard of the horse evolution before? Did you know this was proven wrong 40 years ago? No. It was made up by a guy named Marsh in 1874. Marsh invented the whole thing. He picked animals from all over the world and put them in order that he wanted it to look like they appeared they grew that way. He never found them that way. He just arranged the order. It's all fictitious. This is not a 4-toed horse. Those animals are still alive today in South America. It's about the size of a fox. It's a meat eater, got pointed teeth, has 4 toes. It's not a horse ancestor. They're still alive today. He faked the whole thing, made up the drawings, or made up the pictures, arranged them in order he wanted. They're not found in that order. Even if they were found in that order, that still doesn't prove they evolved that way. If you find some animals in sequence in the ground, it doesn't prove anything. If I get buried on top of a hamster, does that prove he's my grandpa? Any freshman law student could take that one apart in court. But yet they put it in the textbooks. It was proven wrong 40 years ago. And I think it's time folks that are intelligent start getting that stuff out of their textbooks and their zoos, like Dan Hicks did. Dan Hicks in Tulsa, Oklahoma, got fed up with the horse evolution being in his zoo. Here's the book right here, and his name, address, and phone number. Dan Hicks from Tulsa, Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. He's a Zoo Friends member. He gives money to the zoo. But they had the horse evolution on display. So Dan wrote him a letter. Got all the letters right here. He said, excuse me, but did you know this has been proven wrong about 40 years ago? Why don't we take it down? The zoo director wrote back and said, we haven't had the funding to remove it. There's the letters right here. I'm not kidding. So Dan went down to a sign shop and got a bid. $42.50. Here's the sign shop bid in here. Quotation. It says, we will make a sign that says this display is inaccurate and will be removed as soon as funding is available. He went back to the zoo director with a quotation and said, I'll pay for the sign. When would you like it delivered? He said, well, we got to take this before the board. Took 6 months, I believe. Nothing happened. Dan got 2,000 people to sign a petition saying we want the display out of there. It's false information. He finally got, he called, I don't know, politicians, you know, senators, representatives, news media. When it made the evening news that the zoo had an inaccurate display, it was gone the next day. They found the funding. Amazing. But I bet if you'll check your textbooks used in your schools, you got the horse evolution in there. I was up at Yale University, you know, the big Ivy League school, Yale, Connecticut. I was there 2 weeks ago. Peabody Museum. They still have the horse evolution on display at Yale. While I was standing there, probably 300 kids came through, different groups of school kids. They never told them, hey kids, this is wrong. They just let them see it. Hey kids, we've got proof for evolution. Here it is. They're lying to those kids. Now that may not bother you, but that bothers me. If it's taxpayer funded, that's got no business being in there. Now if you want to start a museum and purposely lie to people, this is America. This is the land of the free and the home of the slave. You can do that, okay? You go start your museum and teach evolution to whoever wants to come learn it. That's fine. But don't use taxpayer dollars to do that. That's deceitful. Arranging animals in order does not prove how it happened. But let's pretend that it does. Okay, we're going to pretend. If you can arrange them in order, that proves evolution. Pretty faulty logic, but let's go follow it for a minute. If that does prove something, let me show you the research I've been doing. I'm a research scientist, you know. I've been doing extensive research for many years, arranging things in order. I've spent an awful lot of time arranging silverware. I've concluded after intensive research that knives slowly evolved into spoons. I figure it took around 18 million years for this transformation. Great geological pressures squished it, dished it out, made a spoon. And then slowly, that's the secret, slowly, erosion cut grooves into the end and turned it into a short tine fork. And then slowly the grooves got longer, over millions of years of course, and it became a long tine fork over here. I knew I had the right order, but I felt like I had a missing link, particularly between the spoon and the fork. You see, spoons are rounded and have no grooves. Forks are squared and have grooves. That's 2 jumps in 1. Even punctuated equilibrium can't do that. So I knew there must be a missing link in here, but I couldn't find it. I was flying to Connecticut one time to preach, U.S. Air, 30,000 feet up. And the stewardess walked down the aisle of the airplane and handed me the missing link. I don't think she knew what she had. But my trained scientific eye picked it up right away. I said, this is it. I got it. I stuck it in my pocket. Later that day, I went to Kentucky Fried Chicken. And don't you know, I found another one. I have now found 3. So, the evolution of silverware is becoming very complete. Which means, ladies and gentlemen, I'm ready to apply for a government grant. I need about $50 million to finish this research. I'd probably get it, wouldn't I? Did you know they spent $385,000 studying why the Aborigines smell the way they do? I could have told them for $5. They don't take a bath. Ever. Hey, I even found a few mutations. Didn't quite make it. I'm telling you, I researched this one. No, arranging things in order does not prove it happened that way. You make some arrangement with little minor changes between them. Look, you can arrange words just changing one letter at a time and turn a cat to a cot to a dot to a dog. That proves cats and dogs are closely related. You can keep playing around with this and turn yourself into a fool, which is precisely what they do. They arrange them in some kind of fictitious order and think that proves something. It doesn't prove anything. The textbook says, you know, boys and girls, birds are the descendants of dinosaurs. It does not say this is a theory, or more correctly, this is a dumb theory. It says this is the way it happened, right? Now wait a second. Birds are descended from dinosaurs? In case you didn't know, there are a few differences between a dinosaur and a bird. You don't just put a few feathers on him and say, let's go, man, you can do it. Okay? It's just not quite that simple. You see, most reptiles have a 3-chambered heart. Birds have a 4-chambered heart. Major change. Reptiles have a sac-type lung like ours. Birds have a tubular-type lung. Their bones are different. Their reproductive system is different. Their body covering is certainly different. Reptiles are covered with scales. Birds are covered with feathers. Feathers are lots different from a scale. They develop from different genes on the chromosome. They are totally unrelated. But some evolutionists will say, oh, no, no, they're both made out of the same protein, keratin. Ah, so? That proves they're related. Did you know battleships and forks are both made out of the same metal? That proves they both evolved from a tin can. Are you dumb in any other area? Doesn't prove that. They say, we got proof of this one now, Mr. Hovind. We've got a fossil. We've got proof. We have Archaeopteryx. And I guarantee you'll see Archaeopteryx in the textbooks as proof for evolution. The missing link between dinosaurs and birds. Wait a minute. Archaeopteryx is a bird. It's 12 inches long, the size of a pigeon. Only 6 have ever been found. All found in the same place in Germany. Interesting. Some people, some evolutionists think they are frauds. They're hoaxes. But I don't know. Let's assume it's legitimate. Why do they think Archaeopteryx is a missing link between dinosaurs and birds? They're going to say, well, now he's got claws on his wings. You see those claws? Uh-huh. That proves he used to be a dinosaur. Oh, wait a minute. Excuse me. Some birds have claws today. The ostrich does. The hoatzin does. The turaco does. I'd like to point out that going from having claws to not having claws is losing something, not gaining something. Is that how evolution works? You lose everything and now you got it all? I don't get it. They're going to say, well, boys and girls, he's got teeth in his beak. See those teeth? Uh-huh. That proves he used to be a dinosaur. Now, wait a minute. Not many birds have teeth, but some do. Most don't. Some reptiles have teeth. Some don't. Some mammals have teeth. Some don't. Some fish have teeth. Some don't. Some of you have teeth, and some don't. Doesn't prove it used to be a dinosaur. And again, I would like to point out that going from having teeth to not having teeth is losing something, not gaining something. Right? They told me when I went to school, man used to have a tail, but he lost it because he didn't need it. I thought, didn't need it. Have you ever thought how handy a tail would be? Yeah. Have you ever come to the door with 2 sacks of groceries? Huh? Wouldn't that be nice, have a tail? Open that door, swing it around, walk right in. Have you ever been driving down the highway and wished you had something to hold that can of Coke or tune that radio knob? It'd be tougher to put your britches on, I understand. You'd have to put another zipper or something. Somebody could figure that out. Lost it because we didn't need it. Wow. That's proof we came from a rock? Man, I don't get it. They're going to say, boys and girls, the best proof of evolution is amino acid sequences. I've noticed in the debates that I do, their best proof is always the most recent one they just came up with. Have you noticed that? All the old ones they used to say are no longer proof because they've been proven wrong. So they're always coming up with a new one. Or one they're going to come up with. Yeah, we're about to make a breakthrough and that's going to prove evolution. Okay? As soon as you do, then we'll teach it in the books. Until then, take it out. I was a preacher in Missouri. I always send letters ahead to churches to try to get them to schedule debates at universities or something in their area. It's a perfect job for me. I go to town about 2 or 3 days, stir up trouble, and leave. So I say, try to get a debate at the university. So this one pastor has got me into SEMO, Southeast Missouri University, Cape Girardeau, Rush Limbaugh's hometown. The professors there said, we'll debate Kent Hovind if there can be 2 of us against him. I said, all right. You can have 10 of them against me. These guys are a lot smarter than I am. That's not the question. But I win every time because I'm right and they're wrong. It's easy to win a debate like that. No problem. Anyway, so these 2 guys got up. Their entire hour presentation was about amino acid sequences in cytochrome C. What is this? Well, you see, cytochrome C is a protein. Many animals have this protein in their body. So they take that protein and they look at each different amino acid and give it a letter to represent that type of amino acid. It'd be like looking at a sentence. You know, 26 letters of the alphabet can make zillions of different sentences, right? The 20 different proteins can make billions of different amino acids. I mean, different amino acids can make billions of different proteins. So they look at the protein of cytochrome C and arrange the proteins in order, the amino acids in order, and see which ones are different, out of sequence with other types of animals. They spend lots of time doing this kind of stuff. Vincent Sarich at Berkeley University spends his whole life doing this, developing these trees. They discovered after intensive research, ladies and gentlemen, that man is only 11% different from a duck. You only missed being a duck by 11%. That was close. You might have been flying south for the winter. You only missed being a rattlesnake by 14%. I know some came closer than that. They're going to say this percentage of difference proves something. Look, first place, they could have picked a different protein besides the cytochrome C and got totally different family tree. Why did they pick the protein cytochrome C? It gave the answer they wanted. They could have picked the eyeball, in which case we are most similar to the octopus. They could have picked the blood type, in which case we're most similar to the rattlesnake, I believe, or something like that. It depends what you want to pick. They always pick what looks good for evidence for them. They say the humans and the orangutans are 96% similar. Yeah? That proves they've got a common ancestor 15 million years ago, boys and girls. No, it doesn't. Humans and apes do have a few similarities, but there are thousands of differences. Swap that out there if you would. Thousands of differences. We can go for days on the difference between humans and apes if you'd like. You know, apes cannot touch all their fingers to their thumb. And you cannot hang upside down on a tree branch with your big toe on one side and your little toes on the other side. You know, the brain structure is totally different. Apes do not even have a whole piece of the brain called Broca's convolution. You'll never teach an ape to talk. The neck structure is different. There are thousands of differences. Now, there are some similarities, I will agree. I've seen some apes and some professors that have the same hair color. And they both chew with their mouth open. But that doesn't prove they got a common ancestor. It might prove a common designer. Yeah, what's wrong with that? No, these similarities. But if this percentage of difference means something, I don't think it does. But if it does, let me show you the research I've been doing. I'm a research scientist, you know. I've been doing extensive research on the differences of water content of various objects. I discovered that clouds are 100% water. And watermelons are 97% water. Only 3%. More closely related than the apes and the humans. This proves, ladies and gentlemen, that watermelons evolved from clouds. Not only that, I found a missing link. I discovered that jellyfish are 98% water. And, believe it or not, so are snow cones. Yeah. This proves that watermelons evolved into either snow cones or jellyfish. They're twins, you know, pretty tough to tell the difference. And then clouds. I'm not sure how it happened, so I figure another government grant, you know, about 30 million. I should be able to continue this valuable research. Look, folks, I think they're getting pretty desperate. Real desperate. They want so badly to get rid of the Creator that anything will do for evidence. Anything will do. Are there any missing links? No, they're not. And the major brand name evolutionists are admitting it. Like Stephen Gould from Harvard University, Yad. He says the absence of fossil evidence is a nagging problem for evolution. Oh, how come, Steve? Well, we can't find any missing links, that's how come. I can tell you why. Because the whole chain is missing. It's not just a link, folks. The whole chain's gone. God made them to bring forth after their kind, and that's all they've ever done. You know, the guy with the largest fossil collection in the world is Colin Patterson. He's the senior paleontologist at the British Museum of Natural History. They've got more fossils than anybody in the world. He wrote a book about evolution. He believes in evolution. But he didn't show any missing links. So Luther Sunderland wrote him a letter. Dear Mr. Patterson, why didn't you show us the missing links? He wrote back, Dear Mr. Sunderland, I fully agree with your comments on the lack of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any. He's got the largest fossil collection in the world and he doesn't know of any? Fossil or living? He would put a living one in there as proof for evolution if we have a living missing link? Explain that, would you please? He said, I would certainly have included them. I will lay it on the line. There is not one such fossil. Did you know there aren't any missing links? That's not what the kids are taught, are they? They're taught there are all sorts of them. The professors who know say, no, there aren't. We don't know of any. Evolution requires intermediate forms. Paleontology does not provide them. There aren't any. No missing links. That's why they've got a new theory to explain why. The new theory is called punctuated equilibrium. Yes, boys and girls. Maybe evolution didn't happen slowly, like Darwin said. Maybe it happened rapidly. You see, maybe a reptile laid an egg and a bird hatched out. Oh. So you see, we won't find any missing links because they never existed. Oh, they call it punctuated equilibrium, you know. Maybe evolution happened rapidly, saltations, you know, leaps, jumps. Oh. So what you're saying, teacher, is because we don't have any proof, that proves it. Isn't that what they're saying? Try that one in a court of law and see how far you get. Judge, we don't have any evidence against this guy. That proves he's guilty. Stephen Gould and Niles Eldridge at the American Museum of Natural History have come up with this book, this idea. It's really basically the same as Goldschmidt came up with 50 years ago. Hopeful monster, he called it. Well, we can't find minor changes. Maybe there were major changes. Well, I got a better idea. Maybe there weren't any at all. Maybe the choice is not between slow evolution and fast evolution. Maybe there's a third choice. How fast was that calf going anyway? Maybe it didn't happen at all. Maybe God designed the world. Or they don't want that. Oh, they really don't want that. So anything will do. Charles Darwin said, to suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd. Hey, let me ask you a question. How can blind chance make a seeing eye? You know, eyeballs are very complicated. Couldn't happen by chance. But you know what the textbook says? The complex structure of the human eye may be the product of millions of years of evolution. Why doesn't God ever get the glory for what He made, huh? Look, eyeballs are real complicated. Much more complicated than a car. But let's take the car as an example. I've had 97 cars since I've been driving. Nearly 60 motorcycles. I've never had a new one. I've always had to fix somebody else's problems. We started off when we were itty-bitty. My dad taught us how to work on cars. We've done about everything you can do to a car. We've rebuilt the motor, the transmission, the wobulator shaft, the muffler bearings, the Canootin valves. We've done it, okay? What? Muffler bearings, yeah. High-speed muffler bearings. I know how cars work. I have a basic understanding and a pretty good technical understanding. I understand the difference between the different octanes and why it's necessary and why you get a ping in your engine and about the twist and the torque on the camshaft and I know about the valve grind and the full race grind and three-quarter race grind cam and duration and all that kind of stuff. I understand how they work pretty good. But understanding how they work does not prove nobody designed it. That's the flaw in the logic of the evolutionist. They think because we understand it, there was no designer. Oh, you're crazy. If you did understand it, that still doesn't prove no designer. Now, we do not fully understand the human eyeball. It's unbelievably complicated. But even if we did understand it, that still doesn't prove nobody designed it. And you don't have to see the designer to believe he exists. You know, I've never been to Japan, but I have a Japanese Casio databank watch. Walmart, 50 bucks. This thing will hold 150 phone numbers. It's a stopwatch. It's a countdown timer. It's a schedule. It'll keep your schedule for 2 weeks in advance. It doesn't tell time. You have to look at it. It's a calculator. It's pretty complicated. You know, I've never seen the guy that designed this, but I bet there is one. I bet there's a designer. I don't have to see the designer to believe in his existence, do I? I can see the results. And I don't have to see God to believe he exists. I can see the results. I can see the creation, and it tells me there must have been a creator. What's wrong with that logic? Well, the cars are pretty complicated. Not as bad as an eyeball, but pretty complicated. Let's take this car for an example. Suppose your son turns 16. All three of my kids did in the last few years. My kids are 17, 18, and 19, a year and 2 weeks apart. That's family planning. My wife kind of hated to see June come around there for a while. Anyway, suppose your kid turns 16. He comes in, he says, "Hey, Dad, guess what? I'm 16. "Yep, son, you made it. We didn't think you would." "But you did." "Hey, guess what, Dad? I got my driver's license." "Wow, son, that is a lousy picture." "It's a good likeness, though." "Hey, Dad, can I borrow the car?" "Well, son, sit down. We need to talk about this. Your mother and I knew this day was coming. We don't think you know how complicated the car is, son. Did you know there are 3,000 bolts required to hold a car together, and one nut can scatter it all over the road?" "Son, the car is extremely complicated. Many different systems, the braking system, the injection system, the exhaust system, we don't think you understand it all. So we've prayed about this, and we've decided the car is too complex for you to get all at once. We're going to let you have 5% of the car this year. Next year, another 5%. Let me ask you a question. What good is 5% of a car? That's what you put in a junkyard, right? It's useless. Now, what good is 5% of an eyeball? If you can't see out of it, it's useless. Is the body going to evolve a lens before it gets the optic nerve? What good is the lens? What good is the vitreous humor? What good is anything if it's not all there? It has to all work together. Pretty complicated. You know, they teach us that dinosaurs turned to birds. I want to hold it. Reptiles have 4 perfectly good legs. They run around just fine. Birds have 2 legs and 2 wings, right? Which means, while it's evolving, somewhere along the line, it's going to be half leg and half wing, right? Now, it can't fly and it can't run. And that's helpful? What about when it's 51% wing and 52% and 55% and 99%? If it don't work, it don't work. Evolution has no explanation for these complicated things, folks. It just can't happen. But they believe it did. One fellow said, "We believe in evolution because the only other option is creation." And that, he said, is clearly unthinkable. So what they've done, by their definition of science, they have excluded God. In order to be science, it must be naturalistic. Now let's start from there. You're off base already. See, the Christian believes, in the beginning, God. And we take God on faith. The evolutionist says, 20 billion years ago, all the dirt in the universe got together for a big bang. They don't know where the dirt came from. They don't make any attempt to explain where matter comes from, or energy, or laws. So we believe, basically, in the beginning God, and they believe in the beginning dirt. That's what they believe. And it's obvious ours is religious. I agree with that. But they want to think theirs is scientific. No, they're both religious. Any theory of origins is inherently religious. You can't get away from it. So what should we teach in the schools? Well, there's 4 choices. Teach evolution only. which is what they're doing. Teach creation only, which is what they used to do 100 years ago. Teach both. Or teach neither one. Ignore the subject of origins. You can learn the names of the muscles and the bones and the tendons without learning anything about origins. And if a kid says, yeah, but how did it get that way? Sorry, son, we can't discuss that. Go home and ask your mom. That's the way it has to be done, folks. Or shut down the school system. We can't teach one theory of origins. It's religious. It has to be. 2 Peter 3 tells us the scoffers who scoff at God's judgment, they are willingly ignorant of the creation. They don't want to admit there's a creation because that means there's a creator. And they don't want to admit the flood because that means God judged the world. And they're really running from the coming judgment. 2 Peter 3 is an amazing passage. I mean, it spells out today's people just clearly. Scoffers, willingly ignorant, and what they're ignorant of. The real problem is they don't want God telling them what to do. That's the real problem. A young fella called me one time. He was from the University of West Florida in Pensacola, where I live. He called up. I'd been writing letters to the editor. He said, Mr. Hovind, I understand you believe in creation. Is that right? I said, yes, sir. He said, I'm an anthropology major, and I'm graduating this year, and I believe in evolution. But I'm writing a paper on creation and evolution. Could I come interview you? I said, come on over. We sat in the living room for 2 hours. After 2 hours, he was thoroughly convinced evolution was wrong and creation was right. He said, man, I got to write a paper on this. Do you have any books I can borrow? I said, sure. I loaned him a couple of books. I said, bring them back in a few weeks. 2 weeks later, he called me up. He said, I'm ready to bring you books back. I said, come on over, Tim. He came over. He set the books on the counter. He said, Mr. Hovind, I decided to stick with evolution. I said, would you like me to tell you why? He said, you think you know why? I said, no, I know why. He said, oh yeah? Tell me. Why did I choose evolution? I said, well, Tim, 2 weeks ago you sat on my couch and you were thoroughly convinced creation was true. Then as you read these books, you probably became even more convinced creation was true. And then about a week ago, probably, it dawned on you, man, if there's a creator, there might be some rules. I can't just accept creation without changing my whole lifestyle. See, it's not just an academic argument, folks. It'll affect your entire life. And I said, so Tim, probably about a week ago you realized if you accepted creation, you'd have to change some things in your life. And there are some things in your life that you know God would not be happy with. And so rather than accept the concept of God and the Creator, you've chosen to go with the evolution theory because of your sin. Yeah. Am I right, Tim? He said, I don't want to talk about it. And left. Right between the eyes, boy, nailed that one on the run. That's why people reject God's Word.
That's right.
That's why some of you reject God's Word. You don't have any scientific evidence to reject this book. Show me some. You got some scientific evidence for evolution? I'll pay you $10,000. Put up or shut up. There isn't any. People reject the Bible because of their lifestyle. They don't want this man to rule over them. That's the real reason. And this is part of a long war against God. It's not really people that are the bad guys in one sense. It's Satan versus God. And it started 6,000 years ago. And on the next tape, we're going to talk about what has happened because of this theory of evolution. How it has affected the world. When Darwin wrote his book in 1859, it changed the history of the world. I'm going to show you in the next sessions how the theory of evolution is responsible for the rise of communism, socialism, Marxism, the New World Order. Why is this evolution theory so important that it be in the textbooks? Oh, it's critical. They must teach the kids to prepare them for the New World Order. Yeah. And if you're here today, or you're watching one of these tapes, and this is your attitude, you don't want Jesus telling you what to do, well, you're going to face Him one day. He's going to be your judge. You're going to face Him. You might not want to admit it, but you will. And if you've never accepted Jesus Christ as your Savior, you are going to hell. You might say, I don't believe in hell. Well, you can go to hell without believing in it. That won't affect God for a second. If you're not saved, you're going to hell. You better get that straightened out. God will forgive you. He loves you. He'll save you. He did me. He'll save anybody that'll ask Him. So if you've never trusted Christ as your Savior, why don't you do that today? Why don't you just bow your head and pray and say, Lord, look, I'm a sinner. He knows it and you know it. Just admit it. And then say, Lord, I believe you died for me on the cross, and I believe you rose from the dead, and I believe you want to save me, and Father, I'd like you to do it right now. Just ask Him for that free gift of salvation. You know, your parents gave you a free gift of physical life. You didn't work for it or pay for it or deserve it. They gave it to you. Somebody else had to go through all the pain and pay all the bills, and you got the free gift, right? Getting born takes a few minutes. Growing takes a long time. Getting born into God's family is about the same. You don't have to do anything or pay anything. God did all the work. You just receive it. Now, growing in the Lord takes a long time, but getting born only takes a few seconds. Just receive Christ as your Savior. Now, let me ask you a question. If you are saved, what are you doing for the Lord with your life? Folks, there's a war going on. You're paying for the evolution to be taught in your school system. What are you doing about it? You at least ought to inoculate your kids where they won't get brainwashed with that stuff. You at least ought to spread the word around. You at least ought to study up on the subject and get to where you know what you're talking about. Every Christian ought to be involved in this war. Let's find something to do and get busy for the Lord. Thank you so much for joining us.